Hey everybody, it's wonderful to be here and be a part of this design edition of the Product Leadership Festival 2020. First off, I hope everybody is safe and healthy during this time. I know it's strange times that we live in nowadays, but I hope everybody is safe. It's great to actually see so many people participating, even virtually. And I guess this was all made possible because of the virtual setup. So that's pretty great. We have an amazing speaker lined up for you now, Christy Lenneville. Hi, Christy. She's the Vice President of UX at GitLab, and she will be sharing her keynote on 5 lessons learned from managing one of the world's largest all-remote UX teams. I think it's an even more relevant topic during these times. Now, before I introduce Christy formally, I'd like to do a quick poll. This should be coming up on your screens anytime soon, just to understand what kind of usual team setups everybody operates in. Of course, now most of you might be remote, but I'm just curious to know, what were your general setups like before all of us kind of moved to remote, and how easy it was to possibly switch to this. Now, quick introduction of our lovely speaker, Christy. As a VP of UX, she leads a team of almost 60 UX practitioners who do product design, UX research, and technical writing at GitLab, which is the world's largest all-remote company. Prior to GitLab, Christy led UX teams at Rackspace and HEB. She started practicing UX over 20 years ago as a web designer, developer, content strategist, and technical writer. She's enjoyed watching the practice evolve during this time, and she learns new things from her team every day. Now her focus is on enabling other UX practitioners to do their best work because there's so much talent and creativity to support. Outside of work, Christy enjoys reading, drawing, and playing with her 2 kids, her 8-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son, who both keep her very busy. A very warm welcome, Christy. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so pleased to be here. Let me share my screen.
Sure. Just before you start, looks like the poll results are in, and it's a pretty good mix. It looks like about 30% people working remotely fully or working in person fully, and almost an equal amount of a mix of in-person and remote. So I think your talk will be equally relevant to everybody. Over to you, Christy. The stage is all yours.
Great. Okay, so as mentioned, my name is Christy Lenneville, and today I'm going to talk to you about all remote UX at scale. So, see here, sorry, getting my system set up. There we go. So why is this topic near and dear to my heart? Because I lead the UX department at GitLab, which is the world's largest remote first company. So for anyone who isn't familiar, GitLab is an end-to-end DevOps platform that enables teams to plan, manage, deploy, monitor, and secure the software that they build. And I feel so privileged to have had the opportunity to both hire and lead one of the world's largest all-remote UX teams. So today, what I want to talk to you about is our 1-year journey from 16 to 60 product designers, leaders, researchers, and technical writers, and the 5 key things that I learned during that process. So I'll start by talking about what we learned from hiring so many amazing UXers over the last year. When I joined GitLab in February of 2019, we had 16 UXers, so 10 designers, 2 researchers, and 4 technical writers. Today we have 11 leaders, 32 designers, 6 researchers, and 11 writers who are located all around the world. So it's just an incredible investment in UX, and our product has definitely seen the benefits of having such a strong UX team. So we talked to a lot of amazing UX practitioners as we grew the team, and I want to share with you a few things that we found to be important for hiring people who will succeed in an all-remote environment. So first, we tend to hire people who have at least some experience working remote. And after the events of the past few months, that will be basically everyone. Candidates don't have worked all remote, but we found that experience, at least working with a distributed team, really helps. All remote isn't the right fit for everyone, and that's okay. Some people really prefer working face-to-face, and they don't realize it until they try things a different way. We also conduct all of our interviews remotely. A remote interview shows how well a candidate can tell a story over video. And again, not everyone is comfortable with this. Some people really thrive when they can engage with the energy in a room. We also asked candidates to share a case study of work they've done that they're proud of. We found that this is a good proxy for how they'll share their UX work with their team. Do they only share their end result? If so, what we're really interested in is their process, not just the final designs, but how they got there. And we also want to understand how they share their day-to-day work with their team. Do they document their work and share it broadly where others can find it and comment on it? That's really important when you're working with an all-remote team. We're also looking for people who are great collaborators. Do they proactively bring their cross-functional partners into their process as early as possible? Or do they throw their design or research over the wall and just expect someone to implement it? In an all-remote company, this is especially important because your peers can't just walk over to your desk to ask you a question or give feedback. So I think humility is always important. But it's especially important in an all-remote company. You want people who are proactive about encouraging input. And at GitLab, we call that having short toes because they don't get stepped on. People who seek out different opinions and probe to find where their ideas might fail. Facilitating a cross-functional conversation is how you end up with great designs. And lastly, while we hire all over the world, our teams are widely distributed across time zones. So we do think about a candidate's team and working hours to make sure that they won't feel isolated. So many of these things I just discussed are traits that are important in any UX role, but we found them to be especially important in all remote. So just real quickly, if you're wondering how our UX department of 60 works, it looks something like this. Designers are mostly partnered with a single product manager. Sometimes they support 2 product managers, and they work as part of an embedded cross-functional team that includes engineers. Researchers and writers support several teams, but those teams have a related subject matter focus. And design managers support a larger section of the product based on subject matter, and their job is just to make sure that designers understand the bigger picture and have everything that they need to succeed. Research and writing managers support the entire research or technical writing team. And then we also have a small team that's dedicated to shepherding our design system. But every UXer is expected to contribute to the design system. This is really important because the people actually using the design system have great insight into how it needs to grow over time. So now let's talk about managing all remote UX at scale. When I joined GitLab a little over a year ago, I knew that our team would be rapidly expanding, and it was important for me to quickly understand both what was working well and where we had opportunities for improvement. So I spent my first month mostly listening to the team. It's kind of like an internal research project. I didn't want to make any assumptions based on my previous experience because every team and its culture are so different. The worst thing that I could have done was to begin challenging and changing things that I didn't understand, but were actually working well. Instead, I wanted to focus on uncovering my team's pain points. So based on these conversations, here are some of the themes that I uncovered. First, my team wanted more design collaboration. They were getting really good feedback from their product managers and engineering partners, but it was different than the feedback they knew they'd get from other UXers. Also, they wanted more collaboration with their product managers. They often felt like they were missing context that would help them better understand the business problem that they were attempting to solve. And in a company where we frequently communicate asynchronously, it was really important or really easy for important details to get obscured. They also wanted more context about work that was happening in other product areas. It's always easy to get siloed in your own little part of the product, but this is especially true when you're all remote. When you're designing end-to-end workflows, though, you really need to understand the larger problem that's being solved. And you also need a way to understand possible dependencies and areas where you need to maintain consistency. And then lastly, even though they were all remote, they still wanted to feel like they had work friends because the social aspect of work is important too. So my approach was this. Most importantly, keep the good things. This was really critical to making sure that the team was working efficiently and effectively, but it was also key to building their trust. They needed to know that I wasn't going to come in and mess around with the good things that they were already doing. Also, we agreed to run every new thing, every new idea as a pilot. And I actively invited feedback from the team about how well changes were working. And because these were pilots, we agreed we would stop doing anything new that didn't show a clear improvement in their day-to-day jobs. And we would go into any new initiative assuming that at least part of it was wrong. So this encouraged us to continue iterating to make it better, just like we do with our designs. So before we move on, I want to take a moment to talk about one of the good things that GitLab does as a company that we had to make sure we wouldn't lose in the UX department, and that is trust our team. At GitLab, we work hard to hire really good people, and we expect all of them to be a manager of one, meaning themselves. So when you're working remote, it can be easy to fall into a micromanagement trap because you don't physically see people working. But at GitLab, we assess our team based on output, not the hours that they put in. They can work whatever hours they want, as long as they're meeting their commitments and communicating asynchronously, both with questions and updates. We can see everyone's progress in the work they produce, and because we trust them to manage themselves, they do. Usually the biggest problem we have is making sure that people don't overwork. So as leaders, we stay up to date on their personal velocity and the expectations from their team. And when we see someone starting to work too many hours, we find out why and help them and their extended team to adjust. So as an all-remote company, GitLab is very focused on asynchronous communication. What's interesting is that GitLab runs on GitLab. We use our own tool to get our daily work done. So that means we communicate mostly in issues, which is what other tools often call tickets, and merge requests, which other products may call pull requests. But as UXers, synchronous communication can have a lot of value. It can be much faster and more successful to understand and ideate on problems face to face. What I learned was that my team needed a little bit more of this. But the challenge was not to overcorrect. We needed to remain primarily asynchronous, but still give them more of the verbal conversations they felt they were missing. So we brainstormed together as a team, and we came up with a few ideas. One of the first initiatives we rolled out was a pair designer program. So this was to address the team's concern that they weren't getting the amount of design feedback and collaboration that they wanted. So for designers who work in an office, they can just look across the aisle and have a pretty good idea of whether they would be interrupting someone's workflow with a question. But in an all-remote team, they had no idea. So instead they felt cautious about reaching out. So in our pair design program, every designer is assigned to another designer who is their go-to person for ideation and feedback. We make sure to assign pairs who work in compatible time zones, but we also try to partner people who wouldn't normally work together. And this gives everyone an opportunity to see product areas that they wouldn't see otherwise. And then every 6 months, we switch the pairs up so that we get to know new people better and also experience other product areas more deeply. So there are no constraints on how the pairs work together. Some of them like to meet ad hoc, others have a regularly scheduled sync. This time is for them, so it's really just about what works for their partnership. And as you can see from the quote from Alexis on this slide, the designers really like this program. We also started holding a UX showcase for 1 hour every other week, again, to increase everyone's visibility into the work that was happening in other product areas. So 4 designers share for 15 minutes each, and we record the conversation and we post it on YouTube. So it's publicly accessible. You can see any of our UX showcases if you want. That also means that anyone who isn't available at that time can still take advantage of learning from it. And lets us share the recordings broadly with the rest of the company so they know what we're up to too. The UX showcase is one of my favorite activities because I always learn so much from my team. What I might have absorbed from just being around my team in an office, we take the time to intentionally share. And because we record it, we can always look back over time to see the progression of work that we've done. So if you'd like to see an example of a UX showcase, I've added a short link to a UX showcase by Jeremy, who is our brilliantly talented visual design lead. And in it, he talks about our upcoming migration from Sketch to Figma. And actually, I said upcoming, we just finished the migration. Our newly updated color palettes and our new UX foundations team that's focusing on design ops and our design system pajamas. So at GitLab, teams try to work as asynchronously as they can, and that is a core philosophy for our all-remote company because not everyone is in a time zone that allows them to be in the same place at the same time. But we have found that at the beginning of a project, it's often helpful to get a team together for a face-to-face discussion. So these kickoffs are cross-functional because it's important to have UX, the PM, and engineers all on the same page. And it offers an opportunity for the PM to clarify the business goal and the engineers to note any known constraints. But more importantly, it allows the team to brainstorm together about potential solutions. The key to these kickoffs is to keep them short, usually 30 minutes to an hour. Make sure the team comes in with context about the problem to be solved, and then clearly set the scope of the problem that the team is solving. And then also, we make sure to document both the discussion and the outcome so that we have a record of the decisions that we made, and anyone who can't attend can easily catch up. And as with every other meeting, we record the kickoffs and we post them to YouTube for anyone who wants to see everything that happened. So it's always easy to fall into silos at work when you work with the same people all of the time. But when you work all remote, this can become even more of a problem. One way our UX research and design system teams overcome this is with open office hours. They hold them every 2 to 4 weeks, and everyone in the company is welcome. There's a standing invitation on the company calendar, but they also advertise in Slack as a reminder. People are invited to come with literally any question they may have. And it's an opportunity for people to learn more about the teams, but then also to bring up thought-provoking ideas, which they do. So while we infused a little more synchronous communication into how we work, we also added some asynchronous activities that the team really values. First, some of our designers record video walkthroughs of their design work to keep their teams up to date. Prior to this, they likely shared low fidelity sketches or wireframes with their team in issues. So the video walkthrough is most appropriate for when a design is getting ready to move into development. The point of the walkthrough is to step the cross-functional team through a prototype, sharing the end-to-end workflow and rationale for the intended solution. They also talk about options that they thought about but discarded for whatever reason. And this is a great way to make sure the PM and engineers all understand the design and how we got there. This is the same thing that designers in a traditional company will usually do face-to-face, but in an all-remote company, we have to make an effort to ensure that everyone has access to the information that they need. And as always, we post the video to YouTube, but designers usually post a link to the video in an issue too, so that teams can leave comments, ask questions. If you visit the short link on this slide, you can see an example from Kyle, one of our designers for the security section of our product. So the last activity I'll talk about is asynchronous sketching. As designers, we're used to getting our teams in a room with a whiteboard, sticky notes, and markers to brainstorm together. But when you're all remote, you have to get creative about how you lead these collaborative design activities. It's still possible though. Most importantly, you want to start by documenting clear, simple instructions for the team to make sure they understand what's being asked of them. And then you need to offer them a space to collaborate. We often use Mural, but we've used GitLab issues too, which you can see in this slide. You can see that a variety of people contributed to the sketches in this activity. The designer made sure to remind her team that good drawing wasn't the point, and she even pointed out that her own drawings were going to be ugly too. So if you're interested, you can visit the short link on this slide to see the asynchronous sketching session that Sun Jung facilitated recently for her team. It's important to remember that when someone shares an idea asynchronously, they're not going to get the same feedback that they naturally get in an in-person session through body language or facial expressions. And that can be really nerve-wracking for people. So as the facilitator, you have to make sure to encourage them with supportive comments. Emojis are a great way to give feedback too. And as always, make sure that the results are documented someplace where everyone can find them. So everything I've talked about so far has been more of a formal activity, but oftentimes designers want informal collaboration too. So one of our team members set up a Slack channel just for this purpose. When a designer wants some ad hoc feedback and their pair designer isn't available, or if they have some extra time to give feedback, they pop a note into the UX co-working channel. I also see them posting designs in there for quick asynchronous feedback. So the last thing I want to leave you with is a core principle at GitLab, which is document everything. You may have noticed that throughout this presentation, I frequently brought up the idea of documenting both your discussions and your outcomes. And in an all-remote company, that's probably the single most important thing that you can do, because when you're remote, you have to be intentional about sharing information. So at GitLab, we document absolutely everything. We document our designs and rationale in issues and videos. We document our research findings in a searchable repository that's accessible to everyone in the company. We have a Google Doc with an agenda for literally every meeting, and everyone helps document the discussions and the decisions that we make. This is incredibly democratized and empowering because anyone can add a topic to any agenda. And lastly, we document our team processes in the company handbook, which is accessible to anyone in the world. Our handbook is kind of amazing. We update it dozens of times every single day. Everyone in the company is responsible for keeping it updated because it's a real-time view into how we work. So if you're interested in this, you should check it out. The short link on this slide will take you to the UX section. And then the last thing I'll mention is that even though we work together through technology, we're all still human, and it's important not to forget it. That's why we schedule hangouts that are purely social. In an office, you'd have to have those conversations at lunch or when you pass someone in the hall, but in an all-remote company, you have to set aside time for the fun stuff. We also try to check on each other just to say hi. Slack can be a good way to quickly reach out. And it's also important to remember to give positive feedback for the good work that your peers do. So at GitLab, we have a dedicated Slack channel just for this purpose, and it gets many, many messages every single day. Also, anyone can nominate a peer for a discretionary bonus of $1,000, and our company goal is for 10% of the company to receive a bonus each month. And lastly, we actively remind each other that we don't have to hide our families from our work. Kids and pets are always welcome in our calls, and when someone apologizes for the interruption, we invite an even bigger interruption. So in conclusion, all remote UX works. You just have to be intentional about it.
Great. Thanks, Christy. That was amazing. I think we can all really relate to it, given that everybody was kind of forced to go remote. And I think some of the things, especially the one that you said about documenting everything. So we at SignEasy, we were partially remote and distributed, but I think now we feel the importance of documentation when everybody has to be remote, especially the asynchronous documentation that you talked about. So that was wonderful. I think we have a few questions coming in. So maybe I'll just pull some up. So in your vast experience, you worked in, I guess, every kind of setting, right? And of course, now you work in a fully remote setting. Is it harder to ensure coherence and standardization across platforms and projects when everybody is remote? Or how important are design systems and processes in such a setting? Or does the documentation or the kind of forced documentation actually just makes it easier in a remote setting?
Yeah, that is such a good question. So look, this is always hard, right? This is probably the hardest thing that all of us deal with. I I don't think it's necessarily any harder in all remote. And I think you're right, it does go back to the documentation, and then also having a well-documented full design system with single source of truth components makes such a huge difference. But a lot of the activities that I talked about during this presentation are geared towards solving that exact problem. So for example, the UX showcases, just this morning we had a UX showcase and someone presented on a topic, and immediately afterwards someone in Slack said, hey, we're working on something really similar, we really need to talk. And so those are the kinds of things that you have to be intentional about. But I'll be honest, I don't know that it's any harder in all remote than it is in person, just as long as you are being mindful of it.
Got it, that makes sense. Great. So Archana has a question here. She says, what was your experience managing UX folks across time and space with different work cultures and practices? How did you overcome those challenges, if any?
Yeah, so GitLab's interesting. We have people literally around the world. My UX team is located all over the place. So we have folks in the US and in Europe and in Asia and Australia. You know, it's interesting. I would say the time zones are honestly the hardest part. Culture, not so much. We hire good, kind, compassionate people who like working with other people and get along really well. So for time zones, though, we do have to be mindful about that. So it is not my expectation that if there is a meeting that is at 11 p.m. your time, that you're going to log on for that. That's utterly unreasonable. And this is why we record everything and document everything, is to make sure that, hey, if you can't participate, you still have all the information available to you. That's also why we try to keep meetings as infrequent as possible at the company. And this is company wide. So anything that we can do without a face-to-face meeting, we do. And then we're also really adamant that asynchronous communication does not require an immediate response. An immediate response is not expected. So if I message someone on Slack at 5 p.m. my time on a Tuesday and it's 10 p.m. their time, I do not expect an answer from them until it's their next working hours. And in fact, if they do respond and I know it's late, I will fuss at them and tell them stop working. So yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge, is just making sure that everyone feels supported and isn't overworking.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think especially the empathy and the compassion that you said you should have for everybody, especially your teammates working across time zones. That definitely makes a lot of sense. So Digvijay here has an interesting question. He says, every function involved in product development has certain quantitative measures to track its progress. Sales has numbers, quality has defect numbers. How do you quantify the UX and product design processes in terms of tracking its progress up to expected quality?
What a great question. So there is a page in our GitLab handbook that has our UX performance indicators. So just like quality engineering and development have performance indicators, we do too. So you can see all of them. Again, this is available to the world if you're interested. It's interesting. I actually have folks contact me a lot from outside of GitLab and say, hey, I found this. This is interesting. But some of the things that we track right now are our system usability scale score. So once a quarter, we run a SUS survey, and we're benchmarking that over time. We want to make it better over time. Another thing that we track is UX debt. So when a designer designs something and at the end of the design phase, the PM and the designer agree that, yes, this is what we're going to ship. And then it gets into implementation and we start getting close to shipping and realize that some things are going to have to fall off. One, we try to make that a mutual decision, but then two, we open up issues for that so we can track them and go back later and fix them. But I'll be honest with you, this is something that we've struggled with in the past. We watched our UX debt load grow over time and our average days to close were way too high. So this is something we're really focused on right now, but by tracking it as a metric, it gave us a starting place for a conversation with our product managers and engineering teams around that, because they could see the chart, they could see that the trend was going in the wrong direction. And so now they had incentive to participate with us in driving that down. So we also have metrics around research validation and around technical writing. So we track quite a few different things.
Oh, that's interesting. A data-driven UX team, I guess. Yeah, you make an interesting point about debt, because we see that in tech debt as well as UX debt, and that just piles on. And if you don't address it, I guess at one point it's like you're staring at this massive backlog of things and nobody knows what to do with it anymore. So it's interesting that if you measure it, I guess you're forced to kind of deal with it. Um, Shishi has a question here. She says, I think it's about the pair designers approach that you talked about. She says, earlier each designer would work individually, but now with pair designers, have you encountered conflicts between, I guess, the pair? And if yes, how did you resolve it? Any example or anecdote would help.
Yeah, that's a great question. So something I should clarify is that within the pair, each designer is still responsible for their own scope of work. So they aren't necessarily working together. The idea is they're coming to each other, sharing their work, asking for feedback, basically saying like, here's my idea. Can you please be the first person to poke holes in it and tell me where it might fail? And then also just to ideate with and say like, hey, you know, this is how I'm thinking about it. Is there something that I missed? Now, that being said, we do have, like, our designers do work together. It depends on the project, but, you know, we have an all-in-one DevOps tool. So things are connected. They have to work together. So we haven't really had problems with this. And I think what it goes back to is, I mentioned humility. We specifically hire for humility. It is one of the traits that we evaluate people on as part of our interview process. And that means we're hiring people who want feedback, want to collaborate, don't think they always have the best idea, know that the best ideas come from a lot of different sources. So maybe I'm just fortunate, but hasn't been much of a problem.
That's great to hear. I hope everybody's making notes. If you want to work at GitLab, I think humility is something that's important. Suresh has a question here. He says, hi, Christy, one of the biggest challenge is keeping teams motivated. How do you manage individual performance? And especially for top performers, how do you keep them motivated in a remote setting?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I'll kind of answer those two things separately. So how we keep everyone motivated is we work in what we call milestones. Someone else might call a sprint, but it's a month-long period where, you know, this is what's going to happen in this month. And very clearly, these are the things that I'm going to be expected to deliver during this month. Those things are tracked on a board so you can see where you are in process, other people can see where you are in process, and you can see how you're affecting other people's timelines. I think that clarity around the rigor around how we manage in that way keeps people motivated, because they know, they can see, oh, I don't have to keep track of this in my head. I know what I'm responsible for. So that also means that I mentioned before, we don't have set working hours. Anyone can work any hours they want, because the whole goal is just get your job done. If you've committed to something, then deliver that thing. And then, hey, if you can't deliver that thing, let us know as early as possible what's going on, why you can't, and what the impact is going to be, so that we can deal with it in the moment. And that's been really effective. I'm not going to say that we never miss a deadline or anything like that, but it really is an effective way to do it. Now, motivating top performers, that's a great question. That's kind of different, right? So these are the people who really want to go above and beyond. And yeah, they're always going to get their job done. You don't have to worry about that. What you have to worry about is they're going to start getting bored if they don't have more things to do. And that's where we have a really empowering culture. So if you see something that needs to be fixed, you are fully empowered to go and fix that thing. And that could be anything from spinning up a discussion around it to going in the code base and making the change yourself, because some of the folks on my UX team can do that. I think that freedom to look for the problems yourself. GitLab is not a top-down kind of company. It's, you know, a lot of things come bottom up. We expect it, we welcome it. So giving people the freedom to do that, I think, is really motivating for folks.
That's true. I think for every team, every company, people don't really need motivation as long as they have that freedom, and they know that they're allowed to make mistakes. But of course, they have the freedom to make mistakes, I guess. I think Prabhu has a question here, and this would probably draw upon your experience working with product managers. He says UX designer is part of a Scrum team who knows their stories and features, but ideally designers should also have a clear understanding of the product vision and its requirements. What strategy should a product manager follow to make sure the vision is conveyed?
What a great question. So this is one of the big changes that we've made over the past year at GitLab is our product managers and their product designers and their researchers really work hand in hand. So the PM and the designer are a pair. They're doing basically everything together. The researcher is there for the research piece, but they're involved early and often and broadly enough to where they also know what's going on. And so because the PM is involving the designer and the researcher in their thoughts around strategy, they're all working together on problem validation. The PM is included in design ideation and solution validation. You know, they are all generally really on the same page. I will also tell you though that GitLab is a deeply complex product. It's very difficult to understand. It's a DevOps tool. So these are not things that designers and researchers and technical writers are necessarily deeply knowledgeable about when they join the company. So there's still a lot for everyone to learn. And that broader context is honestly the hardest thing. So what I have seen is that folks generally have good context about what is happening in their little corner of the world. It's that broader context of what's happening across the entire DevOps lifecycle that can be more challenging. That's where we're doing things like the UX showcase and the pair designers to try and build that knowledge because that is what's going to make our product much better. Did that answer the question?
Makes sense. Got it. So I actually had an interesting question here about when you talk a lot about, of course, the collaboration, right? And you have to build processes around collaboration. Of course, the company's culture also comes in and how it encourages that. Well, years in product development have taught me that the best products come out of a very collaborative approach between product managers, designers, engineers, everybody sort of pooling in their thoughts, right? And making the product better. Do you see a challenge here in a remote setting? Maybe something that you've had to work through in your experience as well is how do you ensure everybody still feels included in that product development journey? Because you said that, of course, it's easy to get siloed, but how do you really make sure that the end result, there are no bitter feelings, everybody was able to express themselves and everybody was kind of heard?
Yeah, what a great question. Okay, so I think honestly, the fact that we work so asynchronously in issues is what really drives that. So our issues are publicly available. Anyone on this call can see any one of our issues. You can go comment on an issue if you want. What that means is that no one has to ever feel excluded, and that is by design. You can give feedback on literally anything, and you are invited to do so. So that is the expectation, is that people will participate in that way. And then what that really drives is for the folks who are the responsible party for that issue to be thoughtful about the input that's coming in, especially because it's in public. So much harder to just blow someone off when you know anyone in the world can see how you're responding, right? So that makes us be mindful about how we are thinking about and responding to people. And even if the answer is no, it's not just no, it's no because here are the reasons why, here's how we're thinking about this, here's what we might do next instead. So again, this is core to GitLab's philosophy and how we work, which I think is actually lucky for my UX department. We're just tagging onto that.
Wow, that's great. It's interesting that all eyes are on you, right? When you said that everything's publicly available, I'll be sure to actually go in and check these resources out. On that note, I think one final thought that we can probably leave with, of course, you pointed out a lot of GitLab resources that are open source and anybody can refer to. Any other books or resources for the people here that in design or remote work or remote culture that you would maybe recommend?
What a great question that I was utterly unprepared for because I've been reading a lot of science fiction lately. I will tell you that the thing that my team is really focused on right now is jobs to be done and the jobs to be done playbook. That has nothing to do with remote work, but it's just about how we work together. So that one's a valuable one. And then I'm reading a book right now about OKR management, and its title I can't remember, but that's another one that's important for me because, again, OKRs, we're data driven. This is how we manage our team. So learning more about OKRs. I can look up the title of that later and share it if anyone's interested.
Yeah, wonderful. I think Jobs to be Done, what a great framework. I think that's a great resource for anybody building any product, really, not just a designer, but product manager, engineer, anybody interacting with customers or just thinking about product. I think that's a great resource. Great. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much, Christy. I think we had some wonderful questions, some amazing insights from you. We have a little certificate of appreciation here for you. And I think there's a QR code that you can always refer to, and there's a Hall of Fame dedicated for you that you can look at. And I think the video of this session will also be uploaded there, so you can always take a look there.